It was supposed to be just another evening at the stables. The scent of fresh hay lingered in the cool air, the rhythmic sound of hooves against the ground filling the dimly lit barn. Our horse, Dancer, stood calmly in her stall, unaware of the storm about to unfold. I hadn't planned for it to happen here. But emotions are unpredictable, and passion doesn't always wait for the right moment. Caleb, the man I had been secretly seeing for months, stood across from me, his hands lightly brushing my waist. The affair had started innocently, shared smiles over training sessions, whispered conversations when my husband was away. Somewhere along the way, my heart had slipped into a place it never should have gone. And then, it happened. A sharp intake of breath. A shadow at the stable entrance. My husband, Ethan, stood frozen in place. His eyes darted between Caleb and me, then to Dancer, as if the horse could somehow explain the betrayal unfolding in front of him. There were no words at first. Just silence. Thick, suffocating silence. "What the hell is this?" His voice, barely above a whisper, was laced with raw hurt. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Caleb stepped back, guilt flashing across his face. Ethan's hands curled into fists. "In our stable? Next to her?" His gaze burned into me. "You always said this place was sacred." And it was. The stables were where we had built our life together, where we had dreamed of a future, shared laughter, and leaned on each other through hard times. But here I was, breaking all of it apart. Dancer let out a soft snort, shifting her weight as if sensing the tension. The absurdity of it all nearly made me laugh, but the ache in Ethan's eyes stopped me cold. The confrontation that followed was messy, painful. There was no easy way to justify what I had done, no way to erase the damage. I had told myself I was just filling an emotional void, that Ethan had been distant for too long. But standing there, watching his world collapse in front of me, I realized none of it mattered. The hurt I had caused was irreversible. The aftermath. It wasn't simple. There were nights of shouting, of bitter silence, of trying to piece together whether love could survive such a betrayal. Caleb disappeared from my life, but the cracks in my marriage remained. Infidelity is often uncovered in predictable ways: a misplaced text message, a suspicious late-night call, or an unexpected return home. But sometimes, discovery comes in a way so unexpected that it sears itself into memory, leaving behind a story that feels almost surreal. For Ethan, the moment he caught his wife, Lillian, cheating was one such instance, an affair exposed not in a hotel room or a secluded corner of a restaurant, but in the very place that had once symbolized their love and unity, the stables. Ethan had always trusted Lillian when she said she found solace in the barn. Their horse, Dancer, was more than just an animal to them. She was a part of their family, a reflection of the life they had built together. The stables had been their shared space, where they had spent weekends tending to Dancer, reminiscing about their early days of love, and planning for the future. It was where Ethan had proposed, slipping the engagement ring onto Lillian's finger in the warm glow of the stable lights. It was where they had laughed over muddy boots and long rides, where they had spoken of children who might one day learn to ride alongside them. And yet, it was here, of all places, that he stumbled upon the one moment that would unravel it all. That evening, Ethan had not planned to come to the barn. He had been working late, exhaustion settling in his bones, but a sudden thought made him turn his car toward the stables. Lillian had mentioned she would be there for a while, tending to Dancer. It wasn't unusual; she often stayed late, brushing the mare's coat, feeding her, sometimes even just sitting quietly in the hay. But something gnawed at him, an unshakable instinct urging him to check. When he arrived, the barn was dimly lit, the golden glow from the stable lanterns casting long shadows across the walls. The air was thick with the familiar scent of hay and horse musk, the soft rustling of movement coming from inside. Ethan's boots barely made a sound as he stepped forward, his heart pounding without reason until he heard it. A soft murmur, laughter, hushed but unmistakable. It wasn't the sound of someone simply tending to a horse. It was the sound of intimacy, of whispered words not meant for him. Ethan's footsteps faltered, his breath hitching in his throat. He moved forward, careful, quiet, his pulse roaring in his ears. And then he saw them. Lillian stood too close to Caleb, the man Ethan had always considered a friend. His hands rested at her waist, fingers brushing over the fabric of her shirt as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The way she leaned into him, the way her lips parted ever so slightly in a smile, Ethan had seen that look before, but never for another man. For a second, the world around him seemed to slow. The moment stretched, elongated, frozen in time. He wanted to believe he was mistaken, that this was a trick of the light, that Lillian was merely adjusting Caleb's jacket or helping him with a stray piece of hay caught in his collar. But the warmth in their exchange, the familiarity in their touch, it was undeniable. Dancer shifted in her stall, letting out a soft snort as if sensing the tension in the air. The sound shattered the stillness, jerking Ethan out of his daze. Lillian's head snapped toward the entrance, her eyes locking onto Ethan's. Horror spread across her face, her body stiffening instantly. Caleb stepped back, guilt washing over his features, but the damage was already done. Ethan felt the breath leave his lungs, a sharp ache settling in his chest. Betrayal had a taste bitter, metallic, suffocating. And in that moment, standing in the place that had once been their sanctuary, he realized that nothing would ever be the same again. Infidelity is rarely just about physical betrayal. More often, it is the symptom of something deeper, an emotional hunger, an unmet need, a longing for something lost. For Lillian, the affair with Caleb had not begun with stolen kisses or secret rendezvous. It had started in the quiet spaces of her marriage, in the silence that had grown between her and Ethan, in the slow, creeping loneliness that had settled into her bones long before her heart ever strayed. What she had with Caleb was not just an affair of the body but an affair of the soul, one built on late-night conversations, shared laughter, and the understanding that somewhere along the way, she had become invisible to the man she had once loved. It had been subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. The distance between her and Ethan had crept in like a slow-moving tide, eroding the foundation they had built together. The conversations at dinner had grown shorter, filled with the hum of background noise rather than meaningful words. Their bed, once a place of warmth and whispered dreams, had become just another piece of furniture. He was there, always there, but at the same time, he wasn't. His mind was elsewhere, caught up in work, in responsibilities, in the exhausting routine of their everyday lives. And so, when Caleb entered her world, he didn't just bring excitement, he brought attention, validation, the feeling of being truly seen again. Caleb had always been around, a familiar presence in their lives. A trainer, a friend, someone who shared their love for horses and the open fields. At first, their conversations had been innocent talks about riding schedules, about Dancer's progress, about the small things that made up their days. But then, slowly, the talks had shifted. Caleb had started asking about her, not just about the horses or her plans for the day, but about how she was feeling. When was the last time someone had asked her that? She had hesitated at first, brushing off his questions, but the more he asked, the more she realized how much she needed to be heard. The emotional connection deepened before she even realized what was happening. It was in the way Caleb listened, truly listened, without the distracted nods or half-hearted replies she had grown accustomed to at home. It was in the way he noticed the small things, when she was tired, when she was sad, when she needed a moment of reassurance. And when he touched her, even in the most innocent ways, a hand on her back as he guided her through the stable, a light brush of fingers as he handed her the reins, there was something there, something undeniable. She tried to fight it. She told herself it was just loneliness playing tricks on her, just the thrill of something new and different. But emotions do not listen to logic. They grow in the spaces where they are fed, and with every interaction, with every moment of understanding Caleb offered her, the bond between them solidified. It was intoxicating to be wanted again, to feel desired not just for what she was but for who she was. She had forgotten what that felt like. When things finally crossed the line into something physical, it had not been planned. It had been a moment, an inevitable culmination of all the emotions they had been holding back. One second, they had been standing in the stables, talking in hushed voices as they always did. The next, he had reached for her, and she had not pulled away. It was not just passion, it was relief, it was belonging, it was the feeling of stepping into something that felt like home, even though she knew it was forbidden. But betrayal is not measured in physical acts alone. It is measured in the secrets, in the stolen moments, in the whispered words meant for someone else. Lillian had betrayed Ethan long before he had caught them in the stable, long before hands had ever touched. She had betrayed him in the way she had let herself drift away, in the way she had given Caleb the pieces of herself that had once belonged only to her husband. And when Ethan's eyes met hers that night, filled with heartbreak and disbelief, she knew that the real betrayal was not in what had just happened but in everything that had led up to it. The moment of being caught in an affair is never just about shock, it is about the unraveling of everything that came before it. The lies, the stolen moments, the quiet justifications, all of it comes crashing down in an instant, exposing the raw, unfiltered truth. For Lillian, the moment Ethan stepped into the stable that night, the air thick with the scent of hay and betrayal, it was as if time had fractured. 1 second, she had been wrapped in the stolen warmth of Caleb's presence, and the next, she was staring into the stunned, disbelieving eyes of her husband. Everything stood still, but the weight of what had just been uncovered sent shockwaves through the air, shifting the very ground beneath them. Ethan's face was unreadable at first. There was no immediate explosion of rage, no shouts or accusations, just silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that carried more weight than any words could. His eyes darted between Lillian and Caleb, searching for an explanation that neither of them could provide. There was nowhere to hide, no quick excuse that could erase what he had seen. The betrayal was written in every inch of space between them, in the guilty distance that Caleb had instinctively put between himself and Lillian the moment they had been caught. Dancer shifted in her stall, her hooves scraping against the wooden floor, the only sound breaking the unbearable quiet. Then, Ethan moved. A step forward, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his entire body tense with restrained emotion. "What the hell is this?" His voice was low, hoarse, carrying the kind of devastation that cut deeper than any scream ever could. Lillian opened her mouth to speak, but what could she say? That it wasn't what it looked like. That would be a lie. That it was a mistake. That would be an insult to the months of emotions that had led to this moment. Caleb remained silent, his face a mask of shame, knowing that whatever words he might try to offer would only make things worse. Ethan let out a bitter, humorless laugh, running a hand through his hair as he looked between them. "Of all places. Here." His voice cracked, and it wasn't just anger that filled it, it was hurt. A deep, agonizing kind of hurt that made Lillian's stomach twist with guilt. The stable had been their place, their sanctuary. It was where their marriage had begun, where they had built dreams together. And now, it was where it was falling apart. The anger came next. It was inevitable. Betrayal does not simply sit in silence, it demands an outlet, a place to spill over. Ethan turned on Caleb first, stepping toward him with a dangerous energy. "You were my friend," he hissed. "You stood in my home." His words cut off as if the weight of them was too much to bear. Caleb took a step back, lifting his hands slightly, not in defense but in quiet surrender. There was nothing to say that could change what had been done. Then, Ethan turned back to Lillian, and that was when the real damage was done. "Why?" His voice was no longer just angry. It was desperate. Pleading. As if he needed to hear anything that would make sense of this moment. But there was no simple answer. Lillian felt her throat tighten, the tears threatening to spill over. She had rehearsed 100 justifications in her mind over the months, had told herself 1,000 reasons why she had let this happen. But now, standing in the wreckage of the life she had shattered, none of them seemed to matter. The confrontation was not a single moment. It was a storm that refused to pass, a battle of words and emotions that spilled into the night. Voices were raised, truths were thrown like daggers, and in the midst of it all, Dancer remained still, an unknowing witness to the breaking of something that had once been whole. Ethan did not wait for further explanations. He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy against the dirt, leaving behind the silence of everything that could never be undone. When the dust settles after betrayal, what remains is never just anger, it is the wreckage of a life that can never return to what it was. In the days following that night in the stable, silence became Ethan and Lillian's most frequent visitor. It filled the spaces between them, stretched across the house like an invisible wall, suffocating and inescapable. The echoes of their confrontation still lingered in the air, heavy and unrelenting. There was no quick fix, no simple way to undo what had been done. The reality of infidelity is that it does not end when the affair is exposed, it lingers, weaving itself into the fabric of a relationship, making every conversation, every look, every memory feel tainted. Ethan refused to sleep in their bedroom. The first night, he had left the house altogether, driving off without a word. Lillian had spent that night in a state of numb disbelief, sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched dinner she had made earlier that evening back when she had still believed the affair could remain a secret. When Ethan returned in the morning, he said nothing. He simply grabbed a pillow and a blanket and sat up on the couch, as if the act of sleeping under the same roof was the last fragile thread keeping them from breaking completely. Every interaction between them was mechanical. Ethan spoke to her only when necessary, his words clipped, distant. Lillian tried to reach out, tried to explain, but every attempt was met with a hollow stare or a bitter laugh. He would listen, but he would not hear her. The trust that had once been so effortless between them had been stripped away, leaving behind only doubt. Ethan questioned everything now every time she left the house, every text message on her phone, every moment when she was out of his sight. Even though she had ended things with Caleb the second she had been caught, it didn't matter. The damage was already done. But the pain was not Ethan's alone. Guilt clung to Lillian like a second skin. She had spent months convincing herself that what she had done was justifiable, that Ethan had been distant, that she had been lonely, that she had simply found comfort where she could. But now, watching her husband break apart before her eyes, those excuses felt weak. She had not just betrayed Ethan, she had betrayed the version of herself who had once sworn that love was enough, that loyalty was unbreakable. She had rewritten the history of their marriage with a single choice, and no matter how much she wanted to, she could not take it back. The presence of Caleb in their small town made everything worse. People whispered. They looked at Lillian differently now, some with pity, others with judgment. The stable, once her refuge, became unbearable. She avoided it, unable to face the place where everything had fallen apart. Dancer remained, a silent reminder of what had been lost, her soft eyes holding none of the judgment that the rest of the world did. But even the comfort of the horse could not erase the weight of what Lillian had done. Ethan did not cry. He did not shout. His pain was quieter, heavier, a grief that settled into his bones, making him a different man than the one Lillian had once known. But there were moments, fleeting and rare, where Lillian caught glimpses of something else in his eyes, not just anger, not just sadness, but something more fragile. A question, unspoken but present, was there anything left to save? Days turned into weeks, and still, they remained in limbo. Divorce was never mentioned outright, but the possibility hovered over them like a specter, an unspoken reality that neither was willing to acknowledge just yet. Infidelity does not just end a marriage, it forces two people to stand at a crossroads, to decide whether the ruins of what they once had are worth rebuilding. And that, perhaps, was the cruelest part of all. The choice was no longer just about love. It was about whether love was enough to survive the wreckage of betrayal.